This court will come to order. And you know I'm strict disciplinarian, even though the trial court was my best job in my whole life. Even better than being Chief Justice because of people like you. My jurors, the litigants, the lawyers. And so, welcome. Welcome to the President's home, but he and Rhonda will the First Lady of Mississippi State will also say welcome. But first, we have some preliminary work to do. And where's Harriet? Stand up, Harriet. I said, really stand up. Listen, our respect and affection for each other goes back, what, 40 years, Harriet? 40 years? An old, long-time friend, as we were with John Y. So can you come up, please? And and I know you can't do anything about this, so I'll take the mic off. Okay. Go to it, Harriet.
All right, we don't yet know who the person is who's going to receive the John Y. Simon Award. So I'll tell you a little bit about this person, and you'll be able to figure out very quickly who it is. Not going to be a big surprise. Okay, this person had been a government worker at one time at the Department of Agriculture, and he also has experience of a professor. He was appointed. Oh, I just wanted to say he still is involved and active in the field of agricultural economics, which includes world hunger and food security. He was appointed the president of MSU in 2008. I guess the figures out. And he took office in 2009. And as you know, this university has really prospered and grown under his leadership. It's been amazing, the growth of it. And most important for our organization, he's been incredibly supportive and cooperative, and he and Rhonda, his wife, have been so hospitable to us. We are very grateful and indebted to him. I know this isn't true of a lot of universities. In fact, I was wondering if we could borrow it for a little while for Southern Illinois University. That would really be great. No. And of course, there's the irony of Ulysses S. Grant returning to Mississippi. And I love his quotation, and you all have probably read it, but I have to read it to you again. Whoops. His reaction was, perhaps no state did more to advance and propel the career of Ulysses S. Grant than did Mississippi. So no, I didn't find anything unusual about our university hosting this important historical collection. So I'm very honored, and proud to be able to present the John Y. Simon Award to Dr. Mark Keenum for this year. I won't walk off.
Thank you very much, Harriet. And this, you should know, this wonderful oil, the print of an oil was made by Wendy Allen, who's an in-resident artist in Gettysburg and a very active member of the Lincoln Forum. And we commissioned her to do, she only does Abraham Lincoln in portraits and in other poses. And we asked, John Mozelick and myself asked Wendy to do a grant, and this is the product. So we're so very glad to present this to you. It's much deserved. Rhonda, do you want to say a few words? Good. That's a first.
I was like, this sounds like you, Mark. No, I said, congratulations.
So congratulations, Dr. Keenum. Now, you're probably wondering why I don't have a tie. I'm running a little late because I got a very sudden, unlike many of my texts and emails of late with mediation going on in Rhode Island, some of them actually going on without me. But I'm sitting to listen to John's panel, and along with David and Louis, and I get an email that says, "Hi, Frank, I'm in Mississippi doing genealogical work, and I really would love to see the galleries." Signed, Judy Savage, who is a Superior Court judge, now retired, that I worked with, love her daily, a great judge, the real Judge Judy. And I email her back and say, "Well, this is great, Judy. Come on over. I'm here." She had no idea we were here, Virginia and I. So 2 hours later, she shows up, and we took her around. She was the last visitor of the day to the Grant and Lincoln galleries, and loved them. And on her maternal side, all of her relatives on the maternal side are Mississippians. And she's come to love the state, which is terrific. We do too, as Bulldogs. So stand up, Judy. I want our friends to see you. Stand up, Judge. Here she is. So that some things happen that we have no control over, but are great. So now I want to say a couple of things. I won't speak long, which is not like me, even though I admonish, despite John's admonition, and Ryan Sems about the captions that I sent back to him that were 250 words or whatever. And please, Ryan, where are you? Don't tell my lawyers that I sent back captions more than Terry's limit, because I admonish them that if Lincoln could say the Gettysburg Address in 272 words, your memoranda against motions for summary judgment can be less than 10 pages. So don't tell them that. Now, having said this administrative stuff, let me say a couple of good things about, they are good too, about President Keenum, our 19th president of state. When I spoke at commencement this last week, I encouraged the young people, some 3,200 of them in 3 commencements, to follow the principles of political courage, resilience, and empathy, which are the characteristics that not only Abraham Lincoln had, but General President Ulysses S. Grant also had as part of their character. Now, it's a very short skip and a hop for me to say that this grown adult here, the 19th President of State, Mark Keenum, has political courage, resilience, and empathy in spades. And he has shown it, and I'm not just saying that because he's my friend and a colleague, but because of his progressive leadership that Harriet alluded to at his tenure, here at Mississippi State. New buildings, a spirit that beats the competition about 60 miles northwest of here that shall remain nameless. And he can take credit, even though he's not the athletic director, for the great performances of our women's basketball team, which I've fallen in love with and bled bled like every other bulldog at the finals, and John Mazelik will never give another donation to his alma mater, Notre Dame, again because of their performance. But I have to say that there are things that I've learned coming here, not just for Grant and Lincoln, about the spirit of Mississippi State and what they're trying to do here. Now, this is the land-grant school with the agriculture and forestry, vet school, but there are other things they do under Mark Keenum's leadership, like all of the work they do for those who have autism, and the Martin Center for multi-handicapped that come and just to do artwork. Virginia visited there this past week, just to make the effort to pick out a color for the palette was excruciating, but uplifting for them. Just those little things that we take for granted. So what does that mean here? It means that Mark Keenum's leadership gets into the weeds, gets down at the lowest common denominator of human beings for their edification, health, and welfare. So with that very short tribute, a lot more can be said, Mr. President. I present the members of the Grant Association in attendance at this year's annual meeting to you for your comments. They've already met the First Lady, Rhonda, and a lovely woman, just like Virginia, and opposite from my temperament, and she is opposite in many ways from Mark Keenum's temperament, to our collective credit. So please welcome President Keenum.
My goodness, what an introduction. I don't know what else to say to that, other than welcome. We're so proud and honored to have the members and all the affiliation individuals who are here with the Ulysses S. Grant Association. I know many of you have been here on at least one other occasion, some of you many occasions, and we welcome you at all times. We're so honored to have you here, and the descendants of Ulysses S. Grant who were in attendance. And this wonderful honor, my goodness, Harriet, this is just, I don't know what to say. You know, I never had the honor and the privilege of knowing John, but I've had so many people talk to me about him and his wonderful work. 31 volumes, I believe it is, all of the collection, that wonderful collection that we have of all the papers and documents of Ulysses S. Grant. It's just quite a remarkable treasure. And to now have that here housed and home here at Mississippi State is just a tremendous honor for us. It was a long journey to get here, and I think you all had a panel today to hear some of the challenges that we faced to get it here. But I will tell you one thing I like to remind people is that I was still working in Washington when I got a phone call from our interim president of the university at the time. I had been named president, but I was going through my transition and was not physically here. It was Dr. Roy Ruby. And I'll never forget Dean Coleman, wherever Dean Coleman is. Dr. Ruby called me and he said, "Mark, we have a possible chance to get the collection, the papers, the documents of Ulysses S. Grant that are at Southern Illinois at Mississippi State. And we're in negotiations with the association leadership. But before we commit to anything, I want to make sure you're okay with that." I said, "Absolutely, yes, I am." And he said, "Well, now, Mark, there's going to be a pretty substantial financial obligation on behalf of the university." And of course, you know, I'm sitting in Washington. I haven't seen the budget. I don't know the details. I said, "Dr. Ruby, whatever it takes. Get it. We want it. We want it." And so with that, the magic of Dean Coleman and Dr. Ruby, and really just the faith and trust, over phones, no signed documents, anything. It's a big leap of faith of you as a board to trust us with your treasure. And so it just so happened that the Grant moving vans, as they were arriving here in Starkville, coincided with my moving vans coming from D.C. So literally, President Grant and I arrived here together. And we've been here ever since. So I'm very honored with that. And this is a wonderful, wonderful honor. And I thank you for this. And of course, Frank Williams, has he told anyone that he got an honorary doctorate degree this past week? He hasn't told anyone? Isn't that amazing? He is now Dr. Frank Williams. And in addition to delivering 3 commencement addresses and shaking 3,200 hands, and I'm still getting notes and messages complimenting me for the outstanding commencement address that Frank delivered. It was truly, and I attend a lot of commencements and given a few commencements, but it's truly the best I've ever heard. And we're going to print it up and have it to give out to people who the demand for it right now is overwhelming. So that's how impressive his address was to our graduates. But at the ceremony, we also recognized him with his honorary doctorate degree. And of course, Virginia, how can I forget wonderful, beautiful, intelligent, charming Virginia. We also recognized her with, she is an honorary Bulldog official. So Virginia, thank you so much for all that you've done for our university. And I think you all, maybe some of you may have received a program for this evening. And unfortunately, I was going to speak to you at dinner tonight, but right after this occasion here at my home, I'm headed to the airport, and I'll be flying to Washington, D.C. this evening. I have to chair a board meeting on board for the Board for International Food and Agriculture Development. And we meet at 8:30 in the morning in the Ronald Reagan Building on 14th Street in Washington. So that's where I'm headed tonight. And I will not be able to join you for dinner, but I think Frank and John asked me to share some of my comments that I was going to share with you about our first president, Stephen D. Lee, at this occasion in lieu of the dinner. So where do I begin? I'm pretty passionate about our first president, first of all. His name was Stephen D. Lee, and he was born in Charleston, South Carolina, to a moderately well-to-do family, not an exorbitant, but an upper, I'd say, middle-class family. And he had tragedy early in his life. His mother passed away when he was 2 years old. So he struggled with that, and his father remarried. And anyway, he was a so-so student, but he got accepted to the military academy. He was born in 1833 and went to West Point. He finished in the top third of his class. He was a good student at West Point. He was commissioned in 1854 to the United States Army, second lieutenant. And it's interesting that his his commission second lieutenant document was actually signed by Jefferson Davis, who was Secretary of War at that time of Mississippi. He went on and served in the United States Army in Texas and Florida and the Dakota Territory. But then, February 1861, again, he commissioned in 1854. So he's still a relatively young guy when the war started. But he resigned his commission. He returned home to Charleston. And Governor Pickens of the state of South Carolina awarded him a commission of captain in the South Carolina Regular Army. And he was an artillery officer. But he was assigned to General P.G.T. Beauregard as an aide to General Beauregard. Well, rock along a little over a month later, April, you know, what was going on in the harbor there with Fort Sumter. And so it's interesting that General Beauregard asked Captain Lee to accompany Colonel Chestnut. Colonel Chestnut, just a few weeks before that, was United States Senator Chestnut. He resigned his seat in the U.S. Senate in South Carolina, and Governor Pickens gave him a colonel commission. And Colonel Chestnut, Captain Lee, and Colonel Chestnut's aide-de-camp, they took the aide-de-camp so he could row the boat. They took a rowboat out to the fort to parley with Major Anderson. He was the commander of the Fort Sumter, to demand that he surrender the fort to the Confederate forces. Which, of course, Major Anderson refused the terms, and they had a predetermined signal that he won't surrender. Then Captain Lee was to give the signal, which commenced the firing on the fort. Isn't that amazing? He was there. Not only was he there for the first shot, he gave the signal for the first shot that started the Civil War, Stephen Deal Lee. Well, he went on to serve in the Army of Northern Virginia. Ultimately, Joseph Johnson and Robert E. Lee. He was at Seven Pines. He fought in the Peninsula Campaign. In fact, he was at Malvern Hill. What's interesting about that personally is that my great-great-great-grandfather, Milligan Keenum, of the 26th Alabama Infantry, he too was on the battlefield at Malvern Hill with Stephen D. Lee. And he was wounded there, and he was carried to the hospital in Richmond where he perished. And he's buried at Oakwood Cemetery. I've been to his grave there in Richmond. Well, he went on to fight at Second Bull Run. He fought at Antietam, or Sharpsburg as we call it in the South. But he excelled in artillery. And in the late fall of '62, he was promoted to Brigadier General and sent packing to Mississippi because they needed to shore up the defenses of Vicksburg. And they needed a very accomplished artillery officer to take command of the artillery units at Vicksburg. And they sent this young Brigadier General to Vicksburg. And, of course, he immediately went to work, shored up the defenses. Sometime around December of that year, General Sherman, on orders from General Grant, decided to attack Vicksburg. Well, he ran right into Stephen D. Lee. And Stephen D. Lee repulsed him very decisively. And then that set in motion all types of strategies and attempts by, of course, General Grant on how he was going to crack this nut and capture Vicksburg, which ultimately set in motion a remarkable campaign, as you all know. Absolute remarkable campaign of strategy, of skill, of great courage for him to do the things that he did in coming down Louisiana, crossing the river, cutting his communication lines, and engaging in 5 separate battles leading up to the encampment, if you will, or siege of Vicksburg. What turned out to be, I think, the greatest victory of the North was the capture of not only this key city, but an entire Confederate army. More than 30,000 soldiers were captured in that battle. It's remarkable, absolutely remarkable. 4th of July, 1863. Well, what's interesting is that, who did he capture? But none other than Stephen D. Lee. Was Ulysses S. Grant's prisoner. Well, in that day and age, as you know, the custom was that, especially for senior officers, you could be paroled. And most of that army actually was paroled, including Stephen D. Lee. He was paroled, and he signed an oath agreeing never to take up arms against the United States Army unless he was properly exchanged. Meaning at that time, you could be exchanged for an officer of equal rank who was captured by the Confederates. And it just so happened the Battle of Chancellorsville, we captured a lot of senior officers. I say we. The South did. Don't read anything into that, please. But the South had captured a lot of officers, and so he was exchanged for a Union brigadier general. But guess what? They didn't have telephones. They didn't have smartphones or internet. The information didn't filter to General Grant. And he heard, not very long after he had just captured Stephen D. Lee and paroled him, that now he was given command of the cavalry for Mississippi and West Tennessee Theater. And they knew what an accomplished officer he was, and so that caused great alarm to General Grant and General Sherman. And so General Grant penned a note saying, "I do not believe that General Lee would act in bad faith, but I want to know." And he sent that message across the Confederate lines to find out had he really been exchanged properly. Because in that day, if you violate your terms of your parole and you're captured again, you're going to be executed. It's a very honorable thing. Well, long story short, it took several weeks to get the information to filter down, but eventually the word got that yes, he had been properly exchanged. And so Stephen D. Lee served as a commander of this theater. With his headquarters was about 20 miles due east of here in a town called Columbus. It's interesting because it was in Columbus when he was in his headquarters, and he's a young 30-year-old major general by now, 30 years old, dashing young officer, command of all the cavalry. And oh, by the way, my great-great-great-grandfather, W.A. Huffman on my mother's side, was a 17-year-old private in that cavalry, the 18th Mississippi Cavalry. Okay? So little personal connections with General Lee for myself. But it was while he was in Columbus that he met this wonderful, young, vivacious, beautiful, rich young lady in Columbus named Regina Harrison. She went by Lily. Her father, her grandfather on her mother's side, Thomas Blewett, was one of the richest men in East Mississippi. He had land holdings in several counties in this area. So she was very wealthy and very beautiful. And there he is, a dashing young general. And they developed a courtship. But he went on. He went on to serve as Corps Commander for General Hood, fought in Atlanta, wound up with Hood in Nashville and Franklin. In fact, it was in the retreat. He was providing the shield for the Confederate Army as they were retreating from Franklin. He was wounded. A shell fragment hit him in the foot. And so in late '64, he came to Columbus to recuperate. And it was while he was here recuperating, he married young Lily. He was well enough to go back, and by this time, he was assigned to General Joseph Johnson, who had taken over for General Hood. And so wound up in North Carolina. And 2+ weeks after Lee had surrendered to Grant, General Joseph Johnson surrendered to Sherman. So the point is, not only was Lee at the very first shot, he literally was at the very last shot of the war. And everything in between. A remarkable career in what he was involved in. Well, after the war, he came home. Came home to his new bride's home. And they still own a lot of land here in this area. And so her father set them up on a farm. And that's what he did after the war. He farmed. Well, he didn't just farm. He got involved in it. He got involved in the Grange movement. Became a leader in agriculture in our state. And was very active as a leader. And his command authority, he invoked new, innovative, progressive ways of farming at that time. He really attacked farming like he did in his military life. Well, we were under Reconstruction as the South. I say we again. What am I saying? The South was under Reconstruction. And very arduous time for the South during that time. But around 1876 or so, 1877, the restrictions started easing up under Reconstruction. And he decided to get into politics, he being Stephen D. Lee. He ran for the state legislature, the state senate. He got elected. Went to Jackson, our state capital, as a state senator. And he was there to help decide where this new college, this land-grant college that Abraham Lincoln approved in the Morrill Act of 1862, would be located. And he thought it would be nice to locate it right here, very close to his home. Okay? And a lot of land they owned in this county. And he helped get this school located here. Well, when Mississippi A&M College is what we were known as when this school was founded, was chartered in 1878. It was chartered to be a school that focused on the agricultural sciences, mechanical arts, engineering, humanities, military science. We wanted to be modeled very similar to West Point, from how we would be organized and structured. The young men who would come to school here would be cadets. They would wear uniforms, and they would drill. They would be trained in the military arts and military science with this practical education. His focus, as were higher education leaders of that time, was to produce young men who could rebuild their states that had been so decimated by the war, to rebuild the South. They needed a practical education to equip them to do that. And he threw everything, his ounce of his energy and efforts into that, to train these young men to help rebuild Mississippi and rebuild the South. He did a marvelous job in creating a wonderful foundation for this college that we are so blessed with to this very day. He served from 1880 to 1899, nearly 19 years, the longest serving president of Mississippi State. But he wasn't just an educator. He was someone who was very focused and committed to reconciliation. He ascended to become the commander of the United Confederate Veterans Association. He was the grand poobah of all the Southern veterans. And he used that as a platform to go and travel to the north. He would go to Chicago, to Indianapolis, to Baltimore, to New York, to carry that message of reconciliation, of putting this war behind us. We've got to bind our wounds, heal our wounds, and move forward as a nation of one. That was his message. That was his theme. And he preached that to the young men who came to school here. Put the war behind you. Now, he also took great pride, let me tell you this, in preserving history. And he wanted to preserve history so that it wouldn't just be written by the victors. He wanted a Southern view of the war and telling it with the facts. And he committed himself to working in history. He founded the Mississippi Historical Society here in Mississippi, which I'm a proud member of, lifetime member of this organization. He also created, working to establish, the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. It was founded in the early 1900s. He was on the founding board of trustees and was chairman of that board. And I'm very proud to tell you tonight that just earlier this year, I was elected to be a member of the Board of Trustees of the Department of Archives and History myself. And I'm very honored to be part of that very prestigious organization that's here to preserve and protect historical structures, facilities in our state, but history in general. He believed in that. He was passionate about that. Well, as we got into the 1890s, you had a movement by veterans on both sides, Union and Confederate, to establish military parks to honor those who had fought so bravely in these battles. And the very first military park, or parks, that were established and approved by Congress was the Battle of Chickamauga and Chattanooga. And it took almost, it was an act of Congress to get it appropriated and get it established. But why it was so difficult, because think about it. You've got Southern congressmen and Northern congressmen. And which battlefield is going to get the first national park? Is it going to be a Union victory or a Confederate victory site? Well, the interesting thing that made Chattanooga and Chickamauga work is because one was a Confederate victory and the other was a Union victory. And they all happened right there in the same area. So Congress in the mid-1890s established the military park at Chickamauga and Chattanooga. Well, that just lit Stephen D. Lee's fire. And he went to work tirelessly lobbying Congress to get funding to establish a military park at Vicksburg. That became his passion. He knew what that meant. He also knew that that was the site of Ulysses S. Grant's greatest victory. It was Vicksburg that truly propelled Grant like no other encounter he had had up until that point on the national stage. It got the attention of Abraham Lincoln, that led him to becoming the commander of all the Union forces. It became the great victor of the war, the hero of the war that propelled him to be president, and on and on and on. That goes back, Harriet, to why I said it was here in Mississippi that launched truly Grant's magnanimous career. It showed his brilliance as a general to the nth degree. Lee worked tirelessly because he knew what that symbolized for our nation. Well, guess what? Congress appropriated the funds. And in 1899, the funding came. President William McKinley, who was the United States President, appointed Stephen D. Lee to be on the three-member commission to oversee the establishment of the military park at Vicksburg. The other two commissioners elected him chairman of the commission. And that's when he resigned his presidency here at Mississippi A&M to devote the rest of his life building the military park. And he did. He threw every ounce of his energy and his leadership into that effort to get the military park established. Well, let's go back to he and Lily. When they got married, they had one child. His name was Blewett Harrison Lee. Brilliant, remarkable young man. He was in the first graduating class of Mississippi A&M. He went on to the University of Virginia and got another degree from the University of Virginia. From there, he went to Harvard and got a law degree at Harvard University. And he wound up being a law professor at Northwestern and the University of Chicago, just a remarkable individual. But he wound up being the general counsel to the Illinois Central Railroad, which was like, I don't know, Google. A massive corporation of its day. Illinois Central Railroad. He was the general counsel. Well, when in 1908, and I got to tell you this about Stephen D. Lee, again, his passion for history. Stephen D. Lee said, and this was while he was serving as the chairman of the Vicksburg Battlefield Commission, he was giving a speech, and he once said, he said, "A people who do not cherish their past will never have a future worth recording." I thought that was very compelling for him to make that statement, and very true. But in 1908, he passed away. Well, a year later, 1909, they had a dedication ceremony at Vicksburg where they unveiled the Stephen D. Lee statue. This full military, uniform, and huge, beautiful statue. Well, at the grand ceremony at Vicksburg, they invited a prominent speaker to come and speak at this occasion. And the keynote speaker at the Stephen D. Lee statue dedication was none other than Frederick Dent Grant. Ulysses S. Grant's eldest son, came to speak at Stephen D. Lee's statue dedication. Frederick Dent Grant had become very good friends with Blewett and Harrison Lee. They were very close friends. And so when Blewett invited him to come, and he knew the significance of General Lee and the role he had played for preserving his father's greatest military victory, he was all too honored to come and be there. And then fast forward a few more years later, I find it very interesting that on the 95th birthday celebration in Galena, Illinois, for General Grant, none other than Blewett Lee was the keynote orator at Ulysses S. Grant's birthday celebration in Galena. Isn't that interesting? The ties and the connections. Now, if you were in our library today, and if you had a chance to look out over our quadrangle, we call it affectionately the drill field. Because out on that field, the parade grounds, where all those young men would march and do their drills morning and evening. So over the years, it's called the drill field. But there's a statue, it's a bust, and that's Stephen D. Lee. And if you look at Stephen D. Lee, and you look at his expression, and you look at his head and how it's turned, well, he's looking right at the Ulysses S. Grant Presidential Library. I can't make this up. And knowing what I've read about Stephen D. Lee, he's a fascinating man. I can tell you that there would be no other human being on this earth more proud and honored, even more than me, than him, to know that we have forever, perpetuity, the Ulysses S. Grant Presidential Library memorialized on our campus. Also the home of the Frank and Virginia Williams Lincolniana collection. And when people come here from all around the country and they see Ulysses S. Grant is in Mississippi, his library is in Mississippi, and I've got to go see that, and they come and they see it. And then we try our best to tell part of the story I'm sharing with you, because I want them to see that here in a deep South state, I mean, show enough Confederate state during the war, okay? The president of the Confederacy was from this state, okay? Deep South state, whose first president of this school was a lieutenant general in the Confederate Army. Our second president, President Stone, was a brigadier general in the Confederate Army. Our first two presidents were former Confederate officers, generals, okay? On this campus, you've got these unbelievable memorials to Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant. There's nothing like what I'm describing, what you had a chance to be exposed to anywhere in a southern state. I want visitors to come here to take appreciation of that symbolism, of what that symbolizes for us as a nation, to be a beacon of reconciliation. We're still, to this day, in many ways, trying to get over the effects of that terrible conflict that split our country apart. We're still, to this day, over 150 years later, dealing with that. That's why this is so important to have Ulysses S. Grant right here in Mississippi for the symbolism of what that means. And we take it very seriously. And I hope you appreciate how serious we take it. And we want it to be the finest and the best we can do to help tell this story and preserve this history for many, 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 many generations to come. So that hopefully one day we don't have to be talking about trying to still be mending our wounds from that terrible conflict. So that's my story. And I was, like I said, hoping to share it with dinner, but you got a little pre-dinner appetizer. Again, thank you for being here and honoring us with your presence. Thank you for your trust and your confidence in us as a university. We're going to do, like I said, all we can to make this the finest, make you proud of what we're doing here for this wonderful treasure. So thank you, and God bless you.
We assemble now to go back to the Grisham room. John and Rebecca.
Yep.
Everybody get ready to leave. Thank you very much. And thank you and the First Lady of Mississippi State for hosting us.
Thank Pastor Keenum for that sermon. Leave everything under your chairs. Leave